See, I have a lot of material, so and it's some of it is a lot of it is comparative in terms of stories. So because of that, it's I have to a little bit race through everything because of the involved nature of the material. See, I'm an engineer. I'm the author of the H source of the Bible, and basically I compare the Puranas with the Old Testament. Now, the nature of how we do comparisons, I think firstly I compare stories. I think you compare the flood story with the flood story, and that's it's well known. Then you compare like Abraham with his equivalents in Puranic texts. Then you compare I guess Joseph and Daniel with their equivalents. Then you compare Moses and then David with so those are like individual story comparisons. But within the story, there are also comparisons that one can do in terms of genealogies, like A and B have a son C. Similarly, X and Y have a son Z. So one can compare these family histories and the people around the stories, and then one can build comparisons of that nature. Then of course there are the onomastic parallels, and these are well understood. For instance, the most common one that a lot of people cite is deals with Abraham. Abraham and his wife is Sarah, and his brothers are Nahar and Haran, and they represent in some ways the Hindu Trinity. With Brahma, Abraham is like Brahma, Sarah is like Saraswati, Hara is like Hara, Shiva, and Nahar is like Narayan. So you have that that standard parallel. Then you also have names like Kedar. Kedar is another name for Shiva. I don't know if you've heard of Kedarnath. It's a temple in the Himalayas. So and all these names are very much there, and you hear a whole lot of it, and you'll hear a whole lot of it as my presentation goes along. The other set of parallels are like structural parallels. So I take the Matsya Purana, which represents the picture at the top is it was made by Raja Ravi Varma, and it represents the Lord Matsya. So the Matsya Purana, I compare all the stories in the Matsya Purana one after the other with the stories in Genesis, one after the other, and so that teaches you a whole lot. Now, in terms of the divinities, like for instance El as a divinity is similar to Brahma. Baal as a divinity is similar to Shiva, and in the Matsya Purana, Brahma is the father of Shiva, just as El is the parent of Baal. Then Baal's consort is Anath. So the equivalents in the case of Shiva is Durga. Now Asherah, everyone knows, is El's consort, so she's in some ways similar to Saraswati. And then of course there's the concept of the Holy Spirit. I'll go into that a little further. Then of course there's the question of who Yahweh is. So I'll start with the first couple of lines of Genesis. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But the second line is also as important. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So if you look at the details of that line, so darkness was hovering over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And you read the equivalent line in the Matsya Purana. Vishnu removed the darkness and expanded it to three. Three parts became Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The first object that appeared was water, And Vishnu slept on this water. Since Nara means water and Ayana means resting place, Vishnu is also known as Narayana. So right there you have the idea of God as a spirit, and you also have the idea of water. So you have this the idea of like Ruach Elohim as God as as related to the spirit. So I'm going to take you through a meandering path, but there's order in the disorder. So this picture everyone thinks is Asherah, but actually this is not Asherah. This is someone else. I don't know if you can guess who that someone else is. You see a woman with 2 horses on either side. So that is actually a picture of Sharanya and the Ashwins. Now, that picture is my segue into the story of Manu and the deluge. Sharanya is Manu's mother, okay? And this is the story around Sharanya. She is married to the sun god, and Vaivasvata is basically, Vivaswan is the sun god. And so this is what happens. Sharanya, when she's, she finds the sun too hot to handle. He's too bright, and so she runs away. But she leaves in place someone else, and so that's what you see in the Rig Veda. So this is a translation from the Rig Veda. Twashtar prepares the bridal of his daughter. All of the world hears the tidings and assembles. But Yama's mother, she is also the parent of Yama and Yami, spouse of great Vivasvat, vanished as she was carried to her dwelling. So she disappears and she puts in place someone else, and that someone else is Chaya. Now, Twashtar is also there when we go to the Middle East. When we move to the Ras Shamra texts, you also have Twashtar is basically Vishwakarma. Vishwakarma is the divine architect. Now, the equivalent of Twashtar in the Ras Shamra text is this person called Khotar Vakasis. He's the divine architect. He makes like weapons for Baal, etc. He builds castles for Baal. He makes weapons for Baal, and these are all like stories you can find in various Puranic sources. Sharanya is in some ways like Ada. Ada is the word Ada means ornament, and she and she replaces herself with Chaya, and in the equivalent in the Old Testament is Zillah. Zillah is the other wife of Lamech. Zillah also means shadow, per Rashi. Now, a lot of the idea of Eden, the idea of Eden is is actually Kashmir. Kashmir is the person who Kashmir is named after Kashyapa. It's Kashyapapur. So it's named after Kashyapa. And Amir Khusru, when he saw Kashmir, he said, if ever there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. So now when we turn back into the Old Testament, you have Eden, and you have the Garden of Eden. Now, the Garden of Eden is an important concept in this comparative study. What happens is, in the Garden of Eden, the equivalent of the Garden of Eden is Nandavana. In Nandavana, Shiva and Parvati are making love, and what happens is, one of the sons of Manu, his name is Ela. Okay, Ela treads into Nandavana, and so Ela is cursed, and he becomes a woman. Similarly, one of the sons of Noah sees Noah naked. So he is cursed, and that is Ham. Ham is cursed, And as a result, the story is that because Ham is cursed, Canaan becomes a slave he starts to work for other people. It's something like that. But Elah, as an interlude, Elah is also in the movie Noah. In 2014 there was a movie Noah starring Russell Crowe. Elah is played by Emma Watson. Now there is no Elah in the Old Testament, but Hollywood's happy to borrow from the Matsya Purana. And so they make Elah Shem's wife. And so these parallels at some level are seen. So they are very much there, and as I take you further, you'll see a lot more of it. Now Elah became the king of Balika, and that's where the rest of the story starts. See, right now we are going to split the lines. Like basically in Hinduism, or in the genesis of Hinduism, there are two lines. There is the solar line, and in the solar line, which there is Ikshvaku, and like for instance, the Raghuvamsa happens in the line of Ikshvaku. Then there's the lunar line, and the lunar line is where you have all these Kuru Panchalas who show up. So the lunar line is where we will do a lot of our the rest of the story mostly goes, because we're not going to too much see Rama and so here is the west the link into the west. The eastern side, everyone knows, like Ayu migrated eastwards. There are the Kuru Panchalas, there's the Kasi Videhas, all these. This is all like core India, But the westward migration is also seen in, is explained in the Shrauta Sutra. The westward migration talks about the move into Gandhara, and then from Gandhara, Persia, Gandhara's Kandahar, Persia, and further on, Arata. Urartu, or the land of Ararat, So that is further west. So they are talking of lands which, previously we never thought they knew of, but actually they did, Now, the Balika migration westward, that is what, we see in the Mitanni. The kings of the Mitanni name themselves after the characters in the Ramayana, So they have like names like Bharatarna, like Bharata, Shutarna, Shatrughna, and of course Tushrata, that's the most common name. So here's somebody who's claiming to be like, descended from Ikshvaku. Like for instance, today the king of Thailand says he's Rama 9, So like descent from like a divine source is common among kings, at that time, because it lent you a certain divinity, So that's what the Mitanni were probably doing, And the other side of it is they called the people that they came to rule Hariya. So where do we see that parallel? That parallel is also in the Ramayana. The Vanaras who, like Sugriva's people, in the Valmiki Ramayana, they're all called the Hari people, and so that parallel is carried into the legend of Keret. The legend of Keret is actually a political explanation, and if you read like the Legacy of Canaan by John Gray, you will see the details of this parallel, Now, when we look at the tributaries of the Euphrates, because the Mitanni went to rule the, went to have overlordship over the upper Euphrates valley. There are the two tributaries there, the Khabur, which is one of the Euphrates tributaries, and the other is Balik. And on the Balik river is the city called Haran. And Haran we will visit Haran very shortly. Now, Keret, the story of Keret is Keret is childless and without a family. It's similar to the story of Job. And what happens to him is he's childless. El visits him in a dream, and El asks him, "So, you're, what is you're dear to me. So what do you want?" And he says, "See, I'm childless." So to solve that problem, what El does is, El says, you go and propitiate Baal, and you take your army from Kabur to Edom, and Edom is ruled by King Pubala, and his daughter is Hariya. And so you will get once you marry Hariya, then you will have children, and she has 8 children. The 8th is called Tatatmana. Now here is the where the story comes from. This is again from the Ramayana. This is from the Balakanda of the Valmiki Ramayana. There is the story of Bhagiratha. Bhagiratha also is one childless, and the other side of it is he also propitiates Brahma. And when he propitiates Brahma, Brahma tells him, you have Shiva received the Ganga on his head. Now, the Ganga itself, as a river, originates at the divine feet of Hari. So the Ganga, in that sense, is a Hariya. So I hope you see the big parallel with Keret. So Keret is again a story right out of the Ramayana. So Sarga 55 of the Balakanda Ramayana says that from the this is the fight between Vashishta and Vishwamitra. And basically Vashishta owns a cow, Nandini, which Vishwamitra wants to take. But from that cow, Vashishta produces an army, or the cow produces an army. From the hums of her moving, Kambojas, similar to sunshine, from her udder, Palavas, from her privates, Yavanas, and Shakas, and from her hair roots, Mlechas, Haritas with Kiratas. And again here, this is linked to the Harita-Kirata alliance, which is happening in the West. So how did that show up in the Valmiki Ramayana? This is, the legend of Keret was discovered in 1930 in lost Rajshamra, and it is not known to, it is not known from outside of that time. But still we see this relationship. So I'm going to move on because I have to move fast because I have a lot of involved material. So Abraham, okay. See, Abraham is, we talk of Abrahamic religions. Abraham was deeply studied in the postmodernist era of the 1970s, when they established what is called the minimalist school. Thomas L. Thompson, he wrote his PhD thesis was looked at by Cardinal Ratzinger, and Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope Benedict. Cardinal Ratzinger rejected Thomas L. Thompson's thesis, saying that you can't write such stuff. This doesn't add up. You're trying to teach people religion, and you're saying that Abraham didn't exist. Abraham is not historical. The other book is, I have a copy of it, John Van Setter's book called Abraham in History and Tradition. That again says that there's no you cannot relate it to anything historical. And there are other people who also kind of agree with that. But actually, as I see it, Abraham is Puranic. Abraham comes from the same book that Noah comes from, which is the Matsya Purana. So that is where we will go next. Abraham is a patriarch from the Indo-Aryans who came to the Middle East. So his equivalent is this king called Yayati. Now, before I tell the story of Yayati, I have to tell the story of his wife. See, the Devas and Asuras were always fighting, and the Asuras had there was the king was this a king called Rishaparva. Rishaparva had Shukracharya. Shukracharya was the guru, was the royal guru, and he had this magical secret, Mrityu Sanjeevani. Mrityu Sanjeevani could bring anybody back to life. Now, given this, he was respected, and so Rishaparva he had a daughter as well, Sarmishta. Sarmishta and Devyani were friends, but of course, against against the Asuras, there were also the Devas, and Indra was always scheming and plotting and trying to get rid of or get to a state where he's equal with the Asuras. So they sent Kacha. Kacha falls in love with Devyani. He becomes a student of Shukracharya. And the Asuras, they get wind of this whole trick. So what they do is they chop up Kacha, they feed him to Shukracharya. Shukracharya realizes that he's eaten Kacha, so he tells Kacha, who's in his tummy, see, I'll teach you Mrityu Sanjeevani. Okay. Now you tear yourself out of my body, and when you come out, you use Mrityu Sanjeevani to revive me. And so he does exactly that. But then what happens is, after he revives Shukracharya, Kacha turns around to Devyani and he tells her, look here, see, I came from your father's stomach, so I'm like a brother to you, so I cannot marry you. And so there you have the brother-sister relationship, And you see that also in the story of Abraham. Sarah is his wife, but Sarah is also his sister. He tells the rest of the people that actually she's also my sister. Now Devyani is a bit like Sarah. But anyway, I have to continue with the story. Sarmishta and Devyani are friends, but Indra wants to create some friction, because he's after only one thing: get this Shukracharya out of the Ashura hands. So he takes away her clothes. He takes away Sarmishta's clothes, and as a result, Sarmishta feels that Devyani is wearing her clothes, and they have a fight. So Sarmishta pushes Devyani into a well, and that is when the hero comes in as Yayati is the hero who comes in, and he sees Devyani in a well. I don't know if you all know this, but all the biblical stories, particularly the ones in Genesis, all involve a well. Moses meets Zipporah near a well. Abraham meets, the story of Abraham prominently features a well. When Eliezer goes to find Rebecca, there's a well. She's at a well. So all these stories have a well, and this is well documented. Now, the other side of it is, Devyani falls in love with Yayati and marries him, and she has several sons off of him. She has Yadu, etc. But he secretly also marries Sarmishta. But in the meanwhile, what has happened to Sarmishta is that Shukracharya is now angry. Because Shukracharya is angry, he goes to Rishaparva, and he tells Rishaparva, look here, your daughter has done this. She has pushed my daughter into a well. So Rishaparva says, okay, now I better be careful here, And so he goes and tells Devyani, see, I have to punish you. He goes and tells Sarmishta, I have to punish you. So he tells Sarmishta, you're going to be Devyani's servant. Now, that story is carried into the Old Testament. Sarah is granted a servant by the Pharaoh, that is Hagar. Hagar is granted by the Pharaoh. Per rabbinic texts, Hagar is actually the daughter of the Pharaoh. So right there you have like a very intricate and detailed parallel between the story of Yayati and the story of Abraham. And this continues, The next step in the story is the sacrifice. So now Yayati, what happens to Yayati is he is cursed. Shukracharya curses him with premature aging. So now he looks old too, And what happens to him is Indra is still playing tricks. So Indra invites him to a dance performance in heaven. And the dance performance is being conducted by Cupid or Manmada and his wife Rati. Okay. Now, this is where we go into the story of Ketura, the third wife of Abraham. And this is actually a detailed story, but there's only one line in the Bible. But this is worth also learning. Rati, Yayati is now old, and he's seen, he's now, also, but still interested in the good life, in the pleasures of desire and everything, So Rati, in the meanwhile, what happens to her is her husband, Manbada, is also sent on another mission to go and go and disturb Shiva. Now, he goes to disturb Shiva. The first thing Shiva does is he wakes up from his meditation and he says, "Who's this guy disturbing me?" And he burns him to ashes. So Manmada is burned to ashes. Then Shiva says, "Okay, fine, I burn him to ashes. I'll allow him to come back." So Shiva allows him to come back in ethereal form. So when Rati hears of this, Rati sheds a tear, and that tear becomes Ashrubindumati. That is the woman with whom Yayati now falls in love. Okay. So that tear, the word Ashrubindu is tear. And so we see that when we look at the Bible, so this is the relationship between Ashrubindumati and Puru. So Yayati now is old, but he wants to marry this young girl. So the young girl says, "No, I'm not going to marry you. I want to marry a young man." And so he goes to his sons. First he goes to Yadu. Yadu says, "No, I like my youth. No." So he curses Yadu and sends him away. And this is in some ways like Ishmael. Ishmael is exiled. Then Puru agrees. Puru says, "I'll sacrifice my youth for you." And we see that in different stories from the East. So there are two reasons for Isaac's blindness. One of them is that Esau's wives, they burn incense. But the other reason that is cited in rabbinic texts is that there's a tear that falls out of his eyes, and that tear, which falls out of an angel's eyes, and that tear falls into the eye of Isaac. The name Ketura itself means burning that which causes incense to fume. Ketura, in that sense, is also related to the idea of tearing. Because burning incense, when it fumes, causes tears. So that's the tricky relationship between Isaac and. So the next step in this story is the story of Rebecca and Shakuntala. They are actually polar opposites. Shakuntala has a Gandharva marriage. Rebecca, on the other hand, has has a marriage which is celebrated in every Jewish wedding. Now, there's a second polar opposite as well. Shakuntala was always preoccupied, because she was in love with Dushyant, and so when Durvasa comes to her door, she's preoccupied. She forgets him. So Durvasa curses her. He says, whoever you are so preoccupied with, and you don't give water to me because of that, that person is going to forget you. And so that's what happens. There is when Eliezer, to Shakuntala, she goes to Dushyant, and he had given her a ring, but she's lost it, And he says, I don't know you from Adam, you know. In the case of Rebecca, it's the actual opposite. Rebecca draws, Eliezer sees this girl next to a well, and she draws enough water, not just for Eliezer, but for each and every one of his camels. And in return, Eliezer chooses her, and he gives her, instead of a hand ring, he gives her a nose ring. So that's the full parallel, you know. Of course, the most important commonality is that Shakuntala begets Bharata, and Rebecca begets Israel. And so you see right there, that is Bharata, and on the other side you see Israel. Bharata is said to be the subduer of wild animals, Sarvadamana, you know. And you have the same story in the case of Israel. Israel wrestles with angels. That's why he is Israel, you know. So now the related story deals with Bharadwaja. Bharadwaja was born from, Bharadwaja is the adopted son of Bharata, you know. Bharadwaja was born from a kick of his brother Dirghatamas, who is his twin. Jacob, as you know, was born holding the heel of Esau, you know, or Edom. And so the generation after is also seen in the Bible. Bharadwaja's son, Bhumanyu, succeeds King Bharata. Now, similarly, you know, Joseph is exiled or is sold away. He goes to Egypt. His sons are adopted by Jacob, and they receive the blessing, you know. So I should move on quickly. Wrap up. Yeah. So I have this slide about Bethel and Plakshavatarana. You know, there's the story of Jacob's ladder. So that is also a story which is found in the Mahabharata. Now, there's the question of the fallen angel. The fallen angel is Nahusha. You know, Nahusha was Yayati's father, and when Indra disappeared, they made Nahusha the equivalent of Indra. You know, so he desires Indra's wife, Sakshi. So what Sakshi says is, okay, I'll please you, but for that you have to come to my home, carried in a palanquin by the 7 Saptarishis. So Nahusha sits down, and he's being carried by the 7 Saptarishis. When he kicks one of them, and when he kicks one of them, that happens to be Agastya. Agastya curses him, and Agastya says, Sarpo Bhava, which means be a serpent. And so what happens to Nahusha is he becomes a serpent, and he falls from heaven back into earth. You know, and so there you have the idea of the fallen angel. You have the idea of the fallen angel, but also the word Usha means dawn. So he, in that sense, also represents the morning star. The morning star is tied to Lucifer. Okay. So wrap up. So I have just a couple more slides. So the important question that all this builds up to is the question of who is El Shaddai. El Shaddai is talked of in Exodus. You know, God spoke unto Moses and said unto him, I am the Lord, and I appeared unto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by the name of El Shaddai, but by my name of Jehovah I am not known to them. So this is actually a reference added by the Yahwist. The Yahwist made the monotheistic side of Judaism. Judaism really became fully monotheistic after the Yahwist came. And this is what the Yahwist is saying. He's saying that there was a previous redaction of the Bible, and that redaction had this person called El Shaddai. You know, so now we can turn back and look at who this El Shaddai possibly is. We all know that 6/6 of the Devarim is the Shema, you know, and the Shema is the most important prayer in Judaism. So that brings us to the final question. So who is El Shaddai? And the answer is, so who is his equivalent in the Matsya Purana? So I'm going to read the verse from the Matsya Purana. Kartikeya or Skanda was born after some days. The boy was shown with the radiance of 1,000 suns and his 6 faces. He was therefore also known as Shada Anana. Now, he was also raised by the Kritikas, the Pleiades, the 6 women who represent the Pleiades. The gods armed Kartikeya with diverse weapons and appointed him their general. They requested him to kill Taraka, the demon, and arrangements were made for the battle. When Taraka saw Kartikeya, he said, "Who is this boy? What is a boy doing in a battlefield?" And you all know the story. This is the story of David. And so the rest of the story you probably guess. Kartikeya marries Indra's daughter, Devyani, just like David marries Michal, who is Saul's daughter, and then of course the rest of the story you can probably guess. And of course 6/6 of Devarim is the Shema. So I'm going to close with with a final line from Ezekiel. So God says, "When I brought them again from the people and gathered them out of the enemy's lands, and I'm sanctified in them in the sight of many nations, then shall they know that I am their Lord. I am their Lord, which caused them to be led into captivity among the heathen, but I have gathered them into their own land and have left none of them any more there. Neither will I hide my face any more from them, for I have poured out my spirit onto the house of Israel, saith the Lord." So this could, of course, very much apply to the Babylonian exile, but this could very much apply to today's Israel as well. So I close there.
Any questions or comments? Thank you for a very provocative talk. I'm trying to think big picture here because there's a lot of details in there that I would also love to talk to you about and ask questions about. But most broadly speaking, if you recognize some parallels, I think you might find similar parallels in many literature traditions, particularly related to floods and early genealogies, etc. But in terms of just sticking to these two, that is to say a broad swath of Indian literature and also the broad swath of biblical and rabbinic literature, your title prompts me to ask, why is one earlier than the other? Why do you have the source going from east to west?
That was my guess. There's no. If someone told me, actually that's not true, I have enough proof for you that it went from the west to the east. I recognize the commonality. I accept the commonality, but I can give you enough proof that the stories actually went from the west to the east. You could make, for instance, someone could make the case that all this was written by the British, in the 1900s, because they wanted to have full control over India. They said, okay, now let's make these people accept our religion. It could have been written, but it probably wasn't. So it's possible, but this is how I read it, that there's all this westward migration, and we see all these. There's this person called Arnaud Fournet. He studies Hurrian, and he says that if you remove Sanskrit out of Hurrian, there is not much left. You cannot have, he calls Hurrian an Indo-Asiatic language. Like, for instance, my mother tongue is Tamil. Tamil, there's not much, Tamil is not a Indo-Aryan language. But Tamil is a language where if you remove, all the Sanskrit in Tamil, not much will be left, So in that sense, it's fair to say that this needs further research, definitely. You definitely want to know, if it went from east to west to east. But I see these like detailed parallels between these two single books, you know. So there's Old Testament and there's Matsya Purana, and that's the equivalent.
I think the best case you can have for Western migration is through Persian, okay? And I've forgotten when the Mitanni kings were. I just historically, I need to have a date. But linguistically, you have Zoroastrianism, okay? So the linguistic, what is the Avestan and ancient Sanskrit are essentially sister languages, okay? So comparative work through Persia, I think, is an acceptable line of thought. We've got a big linguistic divide, however, between Indo-European languages and the Semitic languages. And I think that's a challenge for you. You've got Semitic roots. I think it's very suggestive that Haran maybe is equivalent to the city from which Abraham arises, okay? Now that's very, very suggestive. But you've got a huge linguistic divide between Semitic traditions and the Indo-European traditions, which I think may be your largest challenge.
I agree with that. That's very fair to say. I very much agree with that. Definitely the linguistics is, like, for instance, Akkadian, and they all the Semitic languages, they in many ways predate several of the histories, but the people who made the religion, the people who made the religion of Ugarit, and the people who made the religion where you have this kind of Abraham, and where you have names like that, and where they bring these stories, they were probably Indo-Aryan. So a small minority may have been Indo-Aryan, and they may have gone there, and they were part of the culture. So that case one can make. Hurrian is not has a significant Indo-Aryan root, but Hurrian itself is part of the Semitic set of languages, as is Hebrew. But my take is that you have a Semitic language, but you can still have a religion which is Vedic. So this is my contention that, like, Professor Holdreger, she's written this book, Veda and Torah, and there she says, I see these two religions and they are probably from the same genus. So that common root, I feel, exists. And like for in today's India, where there are like 20%, 20% are people of Abrahamic religions, 80% of Hindu religion. I feel that at some level we should say that we have a common root. We are people of the same faith at some level. And that's, I feel, a plus.
I appreciate that thesis in bringing together common understandings that and genetic backgrounds about the whole human race through and the development of their brains and their linguistics evolution in a way that really understood that we are all one people.
Thank you.
Thanks again.